Welcome to the Her Story Circle podcast, the podcast that brings you the extraordinary tales of everyday women who are changing the world. I'm your host, Gertrude Mache, and I'd like to acknowledge traditional custodians of the land on which we meet today. I also like to pay my respects to elders, past, present, and emerging. Every week, we dive into the lives, challenges, and triumphs of women from all four corners of the globe. We're here to inspire, enlighten, and connect, sharing stories that uplift and empower. So grab a cup of coffee, settle in, and join us as we explore the incredible journeys of women shaping our future. This is Her Story, where every woman's voice matters. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Her Story Circle. This is Gertrude Mache here in beautiful Melbourne, Australia. And today I am graced with the presence of yet another fascinating young woman. Welcome, welcome, welcome to our tribe. Please tell everybody your full name, where you're based, and share your story with us today.
Hi, thank you for having me. My name is Stefanie Trenholme. I am currently in Los Angeles, California, although I am originally from Montreal, Quebec, Canada. I moved out to Los Angeles in 2000. I came out for graduate school, and after I graduated, I stayed here. I worked in a private practice for speech-language pathology. I ended up opening up my own private practice, which I have had now for, probably the last 15 years. I specialize in pediatrics. One of my favorite areas in the field of speech-language pathology is language development in all ages, but particularly trying to encourage reading and literacy skills in young children. In my practice, I do have a unique feature. I have a therapy dog whose name is Lola, and she attends sessions with the children. And she has also contributed in other ways into my practice. I always wanted to write children's books to help encourage kids to read. As a child, I did not really like reading that much. And so I wanted to get kids to have a fun way with reading and learning language. And so I decided to use Lola as my star of my children's books. So my first book came out a year and a bit ago, and it is about bath time, the routine of bath time. Fun fact, everybody always thinks that I make it up that Lola loves baths, but she truly does. So that was a great place for me to start. And I am currently working on my second book, which will involve baking. I am also working on a following directions workbook to help elicit active listening, following directions, receptive language in children. And my books that I am trying to create as a speech language pathologist, I am writing them in such a way to help language learning, because I understand learning development and communication development. But really all my stuff that I'm creating is going to be for children, whether you have a communication disorder or not. And having Lola in the office has been great in so many aspects, not only for myself, but the kids and the families that I work with. And she's been a great joy. And I absolutely love my job. I've been doing it for over 20 something years, and making a difference in a kid's life is very rewarding. In addition to working with their families, I generally end up forming very close relationships with the families because a lot of trust is needed in the field of speech language pathology. And so I work very closely with my families. I'm a very big team advocate. I work a lot with other professionals too, which is a nice thing about my field. So I deal with lawyers and teachers and orthodontists and dentists, and we're all trying to be that team or tribe, as they say. It takes a village to raise a child, to help them reach their fullest potential. So I got into the field of speech language pathology in a kind of roundabout way. I always knew I wanted to help children, but I wasn't sure in what context. At one point, I was deciding to potentially be an art therapist. So I did a lot of different schooling. I did a bachelor's of science in psychology, and then I went and did a bachelor's of fine arts in art education, and then I was going to do my master's in art therapy. But it ended up taking a bit of a shift because of a guy I was dating, and he knew that I was working in rehabilitation centers and setting up language simulation programs for adults who had had strokes. And I was teaching art in a reverse mainstreaming school back in Montreal. So typically in the United States, we try to integrate those with special needs or learning challenges or whatever disability that they may have. You try to push them in to a regular classroom setting. That is the goal. But they had a school back in Montreal, which was very interesting, and it was reverse mainstreaming. So it was a school for children that had difficulties either with their fine motor, gross motor, learning, cognitive speech. And what they did is they brought in typical children. And so I was teaching art to these children, and it was really just amazing to see how these children who were brought in were such good role models and trying to facilitate everyday skills with these kids. And I was very fascinated in that. And then, as I was saying, I was dating a guy, and he was saying, well, why don't you do speech therapy since you've kind of been dabbling in it here and there? And growing up, one of my adopted dads had a stroke, which resulted in something called locked-in syndrome, which is a stroke in the basal ganglia. So basically, he was locked in. His brain was, semi-preserved, but he had no speech. He was paralyzed from the neck down. And so when I was about 10 years old, I was actually being taught how to program augmentative devices, again, not really thinking about speech therapy. And then finally, when this guy I was dating said, you really should go into speech therapy, I thought that's the great thing to do. And I love art. And so I've been able to bring in my art into speech therapy sessions, whether I need to make a therapy activity. There's nothing I can use my art background to create something. I can use it as a reinforcer. I used to run social skills groups with a colleague of mine who was a behavioral therapist, and we used art to elicit social skills like turn taking, following directions, being assertive, understanding the differences of put ups and put downs, like how to not tattletale. And we used art to do this. And so when I was trying to figure out how to go about my schooling and how I should do this, Canada had very limited schools. I think at the time that I applied, there must have been maybe 6 schools in all of Canada, and they were only accepting 10 to 15 students. So the competition was fierce. And I did get into one school. And of course, the one school that I got into was a 3 years master program. And I had just already completed 3 degrees. And I thought, oh my God, that extra year is just going to kill me. So that is why I applied to schooling in the United States. And of course, I was grateful I got into every American school that I had applied to. And I decided to come out to California to do my schooling. And at the time when I went to my school for my master's program, a lot of the professors there were doing research and teaching and lecturing in different schools in the field. So they were very knowledgeable, and I kind of liked going to a school where I felt like I was with the in people at that moment in time. And then there was also a on-site clinic, which was really nice. So you could work on the on-site clinic because there's different stages in speech therapy. You have to do a clinical practicum, and then you have to go out and do schooling, do a teacher placement or a speech and language pathology placement in a school with teachers. You usually have to do an adult one, either in a hospital or rehabilitation center. So it was nice having some ability to do it on site at school and then going off to do my other teaching. And so that's kind of what brought me to the United States. And I figured if I didn't really like the US, even though part of my family is from the United States back on the East Coast, I could always go back to Canada where I was from because I could take my degree and go back there. And so that's what initially brought me here. And 24 years later, like I said, I am still here. I used to run a speech pathology department, and now I have my own practice which I absolutely love and adore.
Wow, what a journey you've been on. Now, how did you come to recognize the power of literature in nurturing young minds? And what inspired you to start writing your children's books?
Well, it's multifold. Where I'm from in Canada, there's something called Hanon, and it's a very play based, following a child's lead. And one of the ways that they try to elicit language in children is through art, books, and music. So that's kind of where the wheels started turning. Because when I worked in Toronto, I did work in Toronto for a year prior moving to the United States. I worked at a hospital in the pediatric department, and I was introduced to Hanon, and I got to work with people at Hanon, and I started to give lectures through Hanon about how art, music, and books can be a great way to facilitate language, and it's very motivating if it's done right. And then something that has kept coming up in my practice is that parents always want to read with their children, but they'll get a book, and sometimes the book is just really so wordy, and parents are trying to read through the words, and the kids are trying to look at the pictures, and the parents are getting frustrated because kids aren't listening, and parents don't know how to adapt what's in that paragraph. And so a lot of my sessions are also teaching parents how to read with children, even though if there's a paragraph that's like this big, what's the main idea? Extrapolate the main idea. Use Post-it notes, cover the wordage, write your own words, to keep your child's interest, because we should be reading to children when they're very young. They may not really understand everything, but there's ways to adapt language. So that got me thinking also about how books are laid out. So when I wrote my books, I actually methodically thought how to frame my books. And here, I'll show you because I have a copy here. But I wanted parents to be able to discuss imagery with their children and then words being underneath. And so every page follows the same way. So parents can talk about the imagery and then they can try to read. And then also there's that level of predictability, because when you turn the page, it's formatted the exact same way. And so that repetition is what's going to help a child learn, even when they're little. And I've said to people before, I get videos sent to me from parents, even like their 3-year-olds, who are not really reading per se, but they've read the story, they love the story. And because it rhymes, they're able to deduce based on the pictures and the language that they're hearing what happens next. So a lot of thought and care not only went into writing the book, but also, like I said, the formatting to try to make reading more enjoyable to parents with their children.
Now, your debut book was called Little Lola Frenchie Loves Bath Time.
Yes.
And it features your French bulldog, Lola. I know you've got her there if you'd like to show her to our audience.
I do. She's having a little nap. It's the evening for us, so she's ready for bed. But here is my little nug. Here's Lola, the real Lola. Oops, sorry, Lola. She slipped
on.
She
is. Oh, gorgeous. So what inspired you to focus and center your stories around Lola? And how do you integrate educational principles into your narratives?
Well, I've loved animals since I was a kid. And I think animals offer, besides just being a pet, they just have so many positive impacts on people. And so when I was younger, I've always loved French bulldog, and I really always wanted to incorporate a dog into my practice. So to answer your question, how Lola's used in a therapy session, when someone's doing speech therapy, we often use books, or we'll use art supplies, or we'll use games to try to elicit our goal. So to keep the interest of a child, or to get a goal, like for example, when you're doing a potato head game, we could be working on pronouns, he and she. You could also work on sentence structure. So Lola would be the same thing. Instead of being a game, Lola could be used in a therapy session. So I could, if a kid is having a writing task and we're trying to be able to use descriptive language, being able to talk about Lola, writing a story about Lola. If kids have a very hard time with listening and following directions she used as motivation, as a reinforcer that once we finish our activity, our work, then you can go play with Lola. I've even brought Lola into schools to teach children how to interact with animals because they don't even know how to do that. And so I've even had older children, after they get their work done, to be able to go take Lola for a walk around the block where my office is. So it's really just what the needs of a child are and what is motivating to them. She was used in our social skills group that I had mentioned. We had a kid that had selective mutism, and he really wasn't motivated by a lot of things, but he did fall in love with Lola. And so using different hierarchical principles to be able to try to elicit him to be able to converse with us or his peers, we used Lola. And towards the end of our 8-week program, he turned around and said to the group, "I want Lola." And all the kids were like, "Oh my God, he speaks." So it's just really amazing to see the power of her. And I originally thought about her for the kids, but she's even amazing for the parents. Parents come in if they have a child who has, autism or is neurodivergent and has behavioral issues, and parents can come very frustrated and flustered. They're having a hard day. And Lola will just sit in our lap, and you see moms and dads just petting Lola, and just their whole demeanor just changes. They just relax. So, I mean, proof is in the pudding. And I just said I always wanted to do it. And that's why I thought, even when I was thinking about kids' books, well, it would be silly for me not to have her be the star.
I love it. So can you explain why daily routines are a cornerstone of language learning for children, and how your book addresses this theme in a fun and an engaging way?
Yes. So everybody, all children, when they're learning language, this is even typical children, we learn through daily routines. And the reason for that is because there's a high repetition of vocabulary. The same thing happens over and over again. We learn by doing, we learn by hearing. Yeah. So sitting down for a meal, you have the vocabulary of food or drink, or even a plate, a fork, the utensils, the dishes. It happens multiple times in a day. So kids are bombarded with that information, and you have to first understand before you can actually use the language. So the same thing with bath time. I did it because working on body parts, very important to be able to communicate body parts. If you hurt something, how are you going to relay that? Getting dressed, clothing items is another one. So I wanted to create books that worked on daily routines because it's applicable, like I said, not just to children with communication disorders, but all children. So yes. First book, it goes over all the different body parts of what you would use with bath time routine. In addition to the vocabulary, like you work on nouns, such as the body parts. It gives you an opportunity to work on verbs, such as washing, splashing, drying, rubbing when you're rubbing with a towel. You can work on attributes, adjectives. In Lola's book, there's a pink duck, talking about the color of soap. So this is how children learn. And this is even like if you think about somebody who's learning another language, they learn by hearing things over and over and over again, learning by hearing and learning by doing. So that's how all that kind of transpired, and something that I actually work with families with little children to be able to teach them how to create communication opportunities at home.
Okay. So you have some exciting projects in the works, including Little Lola Frenchie's Bakes a Cake, and Look Who's Listening with Little Lola Frenchie.
Yes.
Can you give us a sneak preview into these upcoming books and their educational goals?
So again, the Little Lola Frenchie Bakes the Cake will follow the same theme as the Bath Time book. And so it's going to be centered around the routine of cooking. I love cooking with children. I love snack time. It's a great communication opportunity. Plus it gets kids involved, and plus starts to teach them independence as well. So as they get older, they can prepare their own snacks or lunches. So
Yes.
the Bakes a Cake book is centered about Lola making a cake and enjoying the cake and all the vocabulary attributed to that. And at the very end of the book, there is actually going to be Lola's recipe of her cake for kids to be able to make with their families so they can all enjoy Lola's cake. And then the workbook that I am in the process of creating is going to be, I guess, a twofold activity book. It will be a coloring book because most children, I mean, a lot of children do enjoy coloring, but it's also going to be activities that gear on early learning. Because I don't know, at least here in Canada, North America, I'm sure it's the same thing in Australia. They have all these educational books for kids, and parents are trying to find things what to do over the summertime with kids, but they really don't understand what these workbooks are really targeting. So in my workbook, I'm going to be putting obviously the activities for the children's, but trying to put in also information for parents to understand by what age a child should be able to follow a one-step direction, at what age should they be following two-step directions. So I want it to be not only for kids, but also for parents to understand why these booklets are being created, so they know if their children are, on mark, what my activities are trying to do. So it's going to be learning, but also educational at the same time.
That's wonderful. Now, what sets your books apart from others in the children's literature genre? And
Sorry.
how have you thoughtfully integrated your educational principles and language development into your storytelling?
Well, I mean, I think the one thing that sets my book apart is I have an understanding of language development. I understand literacy. I understand the frustrations of parents reading with their children. So I've taken my knowledge of language development because, listen, I love the classics. If you look at Goodnight Moon, and I love the Spot books or Chicka Chicka Boo Boom, or I'm gotta think of other ones that are like I really love the old books, and which is what I tried to emulate my books off of. Um, is that, obviously a lot more words on the page, but
Yes.
as kids are young, they really don't, their attention also doesn't sustain for a long period of time. And so parents, unfortunately, they don't know how to necessarily, like I said, read a wordier book. And so they get frustrated. They can't sit down with their kids. The kids don't want to sit there and listen. So I'm trying to be mindful of attention span of children, the understanding of parents, where language comes in, the precursors. Sorry, Lola hears something outside and she's being my guard dog as well. So understanding the principles of what vocabulary will come in first, and understanding how rhyming is extremely important in learning. So it wasn't just a matter of just writing any old something or other, because there are some books that I read and I'm like, no, this is just not going to work for kids. I mean, I'm not saying that not a kid will not like it, but just knowing the mindset of my families and my kids, this was always in the forefront of my mind. And then having, like I said, the art background, the educational background, the speech language pathology background, I pulled all that together to hopefully create books that are fun and, are good for learning. And I think it's also really nice that Lola is a real dog. It's based on a real animal who does work with children. And that's also nice too. It's nice when you have a pet, but she actually works with children as well. So it's another way for Lola to help with learning.
So collaboration is a key part of your practice. How do you work with other professionals like teachers and special education lawyers and occupational therapists to support their children that you treat?
So it depends. It can be done in a multitude of ways. I've done some co-treating with other therapists. I've done therapy sessions where if I have a child that, let's say, has sensory integration challenges and needs a clinic base, I will go to that occupational therapist's office and we will work together. They'll try to elicit their goals to work on that sensory, component, and then me with my language goals. I have gone into schools to support children in their classrooms, more so in the private schools, not so much in the public schools, but I will go into schools and support children to help with getting them to use their language with their teachers and their peers, listening to their teacher, being able to help follow directions, answering questions appropriately. When I deal with special education lawyers, it's usually families in the public school sector who are not necessarily agreeing with the services that are being provided by the public schools. So they're getting an advocate, and then I'm brought in to do independent assessments on speech and language to see how that child is performing in speech and language at that time and how they are able to access the curriculum. I work with a lot of ENTs and orthodontists. I do a lot of oral motor myofunctional therapy stuff. So tongue thrust, tongue ties. So I have to collaborate with orthodontists who are expanding a child's mouth, and I've got to work on getting their tongue back. Or if a child has just had a frenectomy, a tongue tie release, I've got to work on giving them exercises to get that tongue moving. So you name it, I know probably a lot of it.
So what are some of the common misconceptions about speech language pathology, and how do you work to educate the public and correct these inaccuracies?
Love that question. Thank you for asking that. There are, okay, I got to think of the order of importance, but there's quite a few. One, boys, late talkers. I do not like that philosophy at all. Children generally, there are certain norms in which things are supposed to happen. And so I am not an advocate of the wait and see approach. I look at it this way: speech therapy, if it's done right, should be fun. It should be play. I mean, you're still learning. Obviously, sometimes if I'm working with children that need a little bit more of a structured approach, given whatever I'm dealing with, that makes it a little bit more challenging, but it still can be fun. But speech, like I said, should be fun. So I always say to parents, so you were told to wait and see, and let's say a year or two goes by and they don't catch up. Now you've just lost a couple of critical years of language learning, and you're going to feel really badly about waiting and seeing. Whereas speech therapy, start young, give them a little nudge. If they just need a little nudge, they'll graduate from speech very quickly. So there's nothing really lost in doing it. So that's probably my biggest thing that I still hear to this day from even current pediatricians and doctors.
Let's now end our interview with me taking you back into the past, and we're going to go and have a conversation with the younger you, this young woman who set out into the world of speech therapy, moved from Canada all the way to the US. If you could go back and give her 3 nuggets of wisdom based on what life has taught you up until this point, what would those 3 nuggets of wisdom be about life?
Ooh, good question. Well, I did take a roundabout way to get into speech therapy, and I did a lot of schooling. And like I said to people, my mom at one point thought I was going to be a professional student, but I did really believe in all the things that I was doing. So I'm glad I listened to myself. Try not to be swayed by anybody. And as long as you're doing something that you enjoy, I mean, I do have hard days at speech. I mean, I deal with children. They're unpredictable. You get children with behavioral challenges. They're unpredictable. But if you really love what you do and you follow the path of something you enjoy, it won't seem like work. Don't get me wrong. I am happy when the weekend rolls around. But I do love my job. And so I would say stay on your path. If you think you have a passion and a drive, just go forth and try to achieve it. Don't listen to other people as long as you believe in yourself. And my last words of wisdom, I don't think that there's ever really enough school. I love learning and I continue to learn every day in my own job. So I think keeping going with education and learning in every which way you can, even starting at a young age and continuing forward, is very important.
Sounds to me like you will be an eternal student till the day you die. I love it.
Yeah, I actually would like to go back for my 5th degree about animal assisted therapy because I really am very passionate in this field and I really want to educate more people, in using animals and the benefits. And people actually don't even realize that, Sigmund Freud used his own dog in therapy sessions. Originally it was for him, but then he noticed that it was having a beneficial effect on his own patients. In World War I, there's just so many uses of animals in history that, people don't realize that they really are very instrumental in our mental health, our, affect, emotions. So I think I'd like to go down that road when I have time.
I'm sure the time will present itself.
Yes, but right now I will continue with my practice and working on my books.
I love it. I absolutely love it. Now, for those parents who are listening, who have little children, a lot of times parents don't know what to look out for if there is actually something that needs to be addressed in terms of their children's language development.
Okay.
What advice would you give parents? What is it that they have to look out for?
Well, one, listen to your gut, because I've had a lot of families come to me if a child is, not following the same developmental path, let's say, as a sibling, and parents are doing that wait and see and not knowing. Listen to your gut. You know your child better than anybody else. And if something doesn't seem right, there is absolutely no harm in getting an assessment. And there are many resources online that you can see what developmental norms are expected, not only in speech therapy, but in fine motor, gross motor, in feeding, and in play. I know we're not supposed to take the internet as the holy grail because there's a lot of misinformation out there, but there are some very reliable resources that do provide information so you know what milestones your child should be reaching at certain points. But really, at the end of the day, if you ever feel something is even an iota off, ask teachers, ask your doctors, ask other parents. Just to understand if what you're feeling is right or not. And there's really no harm in starting early. The critical years are, up until 8. Not that progress cannot be made later on, but it's a lot easier when a child is younger. And like I said, you have nothing to lose, nothing.
Well, thank you so much for coming online today and sharing your wisdom with us.
Thank you.
I'm sure what you've shared is going to inspire a lot of parents to really think about their children, see how they can support them to develop and grow. And you are available online. I'm going to share your website at the bottom of the screen. Are you helping people internationally, or is it just the US and Canada?
No, I actually do teletherapy for people internationally. I have families in the United Kingdom. I've also helped someone in China. It's just coordinating the time, which is a little challenging sometimes.
Yes.
But no, I do help people. The nice thing, if I can say, the nice thing about the pandemic, we were all learning how to scramble in so many ways. And as therapists,
Yes.
I did go to my office to see kids, but some parents were still afraid to come into person. So I learned very quickly how to motivate and try to invigorate and educate on a computer screen with children. Not all children are appropriate for, telehealth, but I definitely have no problems in trying it. And I do see children all over the world.
Fantastic. Well, thanks again. And thank you to everybody who's tuned in today. The Her Story Circle is a social impact movement. We bring you the voices and stories of women from all over the world to inspire you, educate you, uplift you, but most importantly, empower you with the tools that you need to get from where you are to where you want to go. So tune in again tomorrow when I interview yet another amazing guest. In the meantime, have a fantastic day, morning, or evening, wherever you are in the world, and bye for now. Thanks again for the interview. Thank you for tuning into the Her Story Circle podcast. I hope today's story has inspired you to believe in the power of our stories and the difference you can make in the world when you use your voice. I'm Gertrude Mache, and it's been an honor to share this space with you, where voices from all walks of life come together to weave a rich tapestry of diverse perspectives. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review our podcast to help us share these stories with more listeners. Follow us on social media by looking for the Her Story Circle podcast for more updates. And join us tomorrow for another episode filled with courage, resilience, and empowerment. Remember, your story matters, and together we're building a stronger, more inclusive world. Until next time, keep making